The deputy kicked the lever. The trapdoor dropped. Clara's body fell. The rope snapped tight around her throat, and her 5 children screamed as one, a sound that split the frozen morning like an axe through bone. But the rope didn't break her neck. It strangled her slowly, her bare feet kicking at empty air, her face turning purple, while 200 people watched and did nothing. Then a rifle shot cracked across the square. The rope exploded. Clara crashed onto the snow-covered platform, gasping, choking alive. A stranger stood at the edge of the crowd, smoke still rising from his barrel. The next bullet goes through any man who touches her again. Before we begin, I need to ask you something. Will you stay with me until the end of this story? If you do subscribe to my channel and leave a comment telling me what city you're watching from, I want to see how far this tale travels. Now let me take you back to 10 minutes before that shot, to the moment when a cowboy rode into town for a milk cow and found something that would change everything. 10 minutes earlier. Jeremiah Hollister heard the screaming before he saw the town. 5 voices. Children's voices. Raw with terror and grief, cutting through the frozen Wyoming wind like nothing he'd heard since the night his own sons died. He kicked his horse into a gallop. Willow Creek appeared through the swirling snow, a dying mining town huddled in a valley gray and lifeless, except for the crowd packed into the main square. 200 people, maybe more, all facing the same direction, all facing the gallows. Jeb pulled his horse up hard, and his blood turned to ice. A woman stood on the scaffold with a noose around her neck. Bare feet on frozen wood, dress torn, face beaten so badly he couldn't tell if she was young or old, pretty or plain. One eye swollen shut, the other staring straight ahead at nothing. Below her, 5 children fought against the crowd like drowning animals. "Mama, Mama, please, don't let them do this." The oldest was a girl maybe 14, clutching a toddler against her chest while tears froze on her cheeks. A boy around 12 punched and kicked at anyone who tried to hold him back. 2 smaller girls, 1916, stood paralyzed, their mouths open in silent screams. "Let me go!" The boy broke free and ran for the scaffold. "That's my mama. She didn't do nothing. She didn't." A deputy caught him by the collar and threw him to the ground. The boy's head cracked against frozen dirt. His sisters screamed. The toddler started wailing. And the crowd just watched. Jeb's hand moved to his rifle before he knew what he was doing. 6 years. 6 years since he'd touched this weapon for anything but hunting. 6 years since he'd buried his badge with his wife and sons and sworn he was done caring about anything or anyone. But those children. God Almighty, those children. Good people of Willow Creek. A fat man in an expensive coat stepped forward on the scaffold, silver hair gleaming gold rings, flashing on every finger. "We are gathered here in the sight of God and law to execute Clara Mae Brennan for the murder of Marcus Whitfield." The woman Clara didn't react, didn't move, stood there like she was already dead. "Any last words?" The fat man asked, his voice dripping with false mercy. Clara's cracked lips moved. No sound came out. "Very well." The fat man nodded to the deputy by the lever. "Justice will be served." "No." The 14-year-old girl lunged forward with the toddler still in her arms. "Please. She's innocent. She didn't kill anyone. Please, someone help us. Someone." No one moved. Jeb watched 200 people stand in silence while a mother was about to die and her children begged for mercy. He watched the deputy's hand close around the lever. He watched the fat man smile, and something inside him that had been dead for 6 years suddenly roared back to life. He raised his rifle. The deputy pulled the lever. The trapdoor dropped. Jeb fired. The rope exploded in a shower of fibers, and Clara crashed onto the platform, her body convulsing as she gasped for air. The crowd went dead silent. 200 heads turned toward the stranger on horseback at the edge of the square. "The next bullet," Jeb said, his voice carrying across the frozen air, "goes through any man who touches her again." Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The fat man recovered first. His face had gone purple with rage, but his voice stayed smooth as snake oil. "Who are you to interfere with lawful justice?" "Name's Jeremiah Hollister." Jeb walked his horse forward slowly, rifle still raised. "Used to be sheriff of Copper Falls, still a territorial deputy. And what I just saw wasn't justice, it was murder. This woman killed a man. She was tried and convicted. When? What? When was the trial?" The fat man's eye twitched. "Yesterday." "Yesterday." Jeb let the word hang in the air. "You arrested her, tried her, convicted her, and built a gallows all in one day. That ain't law. That's a lynching with paperwork." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some folks were nodding. Others looked uncertain, like they were seeing the morning's events in a new light. Jeb reached the base of the scaffold and dismounted in one smooth motion, keeping his rifle trained on the deputies. "I'm taking this woman into custody pending a proper investigation. Anyone got a problem with that, they can take it up with the territorial court. You have no authority here." The fat man's smooth mask was cracking. "I am Judge Solomon Thatcher. I run this town." "Then you should know the law better." Jeb climbed the scaffold steps, his boots thudding against the wood. Territorial deputies can intervene in any case where due process is violated. And brother, this whole thing stinks of violation. He reached Clara. She lay curled on the platform, hands clawing at the rope still tight around her throat, her one good eye wild with terror and confusion. Up close, Jeb could see the full extent of what they'd done to her. Bruises covered every inch of visible skin. Her fingernails were torn and bloody, and her hands shook with a tremor that spoke of something worse than cold. Poison, he thought. Someone's been poisoning her. He knelt beside her and loosened the noose gently. "Easy, ma'am. Easy. I've got you." "My children." Her voice was barely a whisper, rough as gravel. "Please. My children. They're safe. I'm getting all of you out of here." He helped her sit up, and she grabbed his arm with surprising strength. Her one good eye focused on his face with an intensity that cut right through him. "I didn't kill him," she said. "I swear on my children's lives, I didn't kill anyone." "I believe you." "You don't even know me." "No, ma'am, but I know what a railroad job looks like, and I know what a mother sounds like when she's telling the truth." He stood and pulled her up with him. She swayed, nearly collapsed, and he caught her against his chest. "Can you walk?" "I can do whatever I have to do." There it was. Fire. Despite everything, the beating, the poison, the noose, there was still fire in this woman. "Mama!" The 14-year-old girl had reached the scaffold, the toddler still clutched against her shoulder. Behind her came the others, the boy with blood on his face. The two smaller girls holding hands so tight their knuckles were white. "Hannah." Clara's voice broke. "Oh, baby, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." "Don't be sorry, Mama." Hannah was crying openly now, but her voice was steady. "Don't you ever be sorry. You didn't do anything wrong." The 12-year-old boy pushed past his sister, his young face twisted with rage and relief, and something that looked like it might shatter at any moment. "Mama, I tried to stop them. I tried, but they—" "Elijah." Clara reached out and touched his bloody face. "My brave boy, you did everything right, everything." "We need to move." Jeb scanned the crowd. Most people looked stunned, uncertain. But Judge Thatcher was speaking urgently to a group of men near the back, and their hands were moving toward their guns. "Now." "Our things," Hannah started. "Leave them. We'll come back." He lifted Clara onto his horse, then turned to the children. "Can you all walk 8 miles? We can walk 800 if it gets Mama away from here." This from the 9-year-old girl Molly, he'd learn later, her small face fierce, despite the tears still streaming down it. "Good girl." Jeb looked at Hannah. "You lead the way. Follow this road west until you see a split pine tree, then turn north. I'll be right behind you with your mother." "What about them?" Elijah jerked his head toward the deputies who were regrouping near the scaffold. "They won't follow, not yet." Jeb pulled his badge from his coat and pinned it to his chest where everyone could see. I'm still the law in this territory. They try to stop us. They're the criminals. That won't matter to men like Thatcher, Clara said quietly. He owns this town. He owns everyone in it. He doesn't own me. Jeb took the reins and started walking. And starting today, he doesn't own you either. They moved through the crowd, which parted before them like water around a stone. Jeb kept his rifle ready, his eyes scanning for threats, but no one made a move. Whatever Thatcher was planning, he wasn't ready to do it in broad daylight with witnesses. That would come later. Jeb knew it as surely as he knew his own name. Men like Thatcher didn't let challenges go unanswered. Tonight or tomorrow there would be riders coming up the valley road with torches and guns, but that was a problem for later. Right now, he had to get this family somewhere safe. They reached the edge of town without incident. The road stretched ahead white with fresh snow winding up into the mountains toward Jeb's ranch. 8 miles of frozen wilderness, with a sick woman, 5 children, and winter closing in around them like a fist. Mr. Jeb looked down. The 6-year-old Grace he'd learned was looking up at him with eyes too big for her face. Yes, little one. Are you an angel? The question hit him like a punch to the gut. His own daughter had asked him that once, the night he'd saved her from a rattlesnake in the barn. Are you an angel? Papa, did God send you to protect me? He'd laughed and called her his little blessing. 2 years later, she was dead. No, he said, his voice rough. I'm not an angel, just a man. But you saved Mama. I tried. That's what angels do. Grace reached up and took his hand. Her fingers were so small, so cold, but she held on like she'd never let go. They try. Jeb couldn't speak. He just squeezed her hand and kept walking. Behind them, Willow Creek grew smaller and smaller, until it was just a smudge of gray against the white landscape. Ahead, the mountains rose up like a fortress, cold and indifferent to the struggles of the people who lived in their shadow. Clara leaned against the horse's neck, her breathing shallow but steady. The poison was still working through her system. Jeb could see it in the tremor of her hands, the grayish cast to her skin, but she was fighting. Every step the horse took, she was fighting to stay conscious, stay alive, stay with her children. Mama! The toddler. Billy stirred in Hannah's arms. Mama cold. Want Mama. I'm here, baby. Clara's voice was barely audible. Mama's right here. Want up. Want Mama. Hannah looked at Jeb helplessly. He's been sick for 3 days. Fever. We couldn't afford the doctor, and now. Give him to me. Clara held out her shaking hands. Give me my son. Mama, you can barely sit up. Give me my son. Hannah passed Billy up, and Clara gathered him against her chest with a mother's fierce tenderness. The toddler immediately burrowed into her, his small hands clutching her torn dress, his fever-hot face pressing against her neck. Mama's here, Clara whispered. Mama's got you. Everything's going to be all right. It was a lie. They all knew it was a lie. Nothing was all right. A sick child, a poisoned mother, a town that wanted them dead, and 8 miles of frozen hell between them and shelter. But Billy believed it. He relaxed against his mother, his crying fading to soft whimpers, and that was enough. That was everything. 2 hours into the walk, Elijah fell. He'd been pushing himself hard, staying at the back of the group, watching for pursuit. Playing the man of the family at 12 years old, because there was no one else to do it. When he went down hard, his legs simply giving out beneath him. Elijah. Molly ran to her brother Grace, right behind her. Jeb stopped the horse and turned back. The boy lay in the snow, his face gray with exhaustion, his lips blue with cold. His coat thin, meant for autumn. Not Wyoming winter was soaked through with sweat and snow. I'm fine. Elijah tried to push himself up and failed. Just give me a minute. I'm fine. You're not fine. Jeb handed the reins to Hannah and walked back to where the boy lay. You're half frozen and 3/4 exhausted. No shame in that. I can walk. Elijah's jaw was set, his eyes fierce. I don't need help. Never said you did. Jeb squatted down beside him. But your mama needs you strong when we get where we're going. There's gonna be trouble, and she'll need every one of you fighting fit. So you can be stubborn and freeze out here, or you can let me help you now so you can help her later. Your choice. The boy stared at him for a long moment. Then slowly, the stubbornness drained out of his face, replaced by something that looked almost like relief. Okay, he whispered. Okay. Jeb pulled him up and half carried him to the horse. Clara reached down and touched her son's face. My brave boy, she said again. Always trying to carry more than you should. Someone has to, Mama. Not alone. Never alone. Her eyes met Jeb's over her son's head. Thank you. Save your thanks. We're not there yet. They redistributed the weight. Elijah rode behind his mother, his arms wrapped around her waist, while Jeb carried Grace on his shoulders and held Molly's hand. Hannah walked beside the horse with Billy in her arms, her face set in an expression of grim determination that made her look far older than 14. The snow started falling harder around them, thick flakes that cut visibility to almost nothing. The temperature dropped. The wind picked up, howling through the valley like something alive and hungry. How much farther? Hannah asked. 4 miles, maybe 5. Billy's fever is getting worse. Jeb could hear it in the toddler's breathing, that wet, rattling sound that every parent dreaded. The child needed warmth medicine rest, none of which were available in the middle of a Wyoming blizzard. Mama. Grace's small voice came from above his head. Is Billy gonna die like Papa did? The question fell into silence. Clara's face went white. Hannah's jaw tightened. Even Elijah flinched. No baby. Clara's voice was steady, but Jeb could hear the terror underneath. Billy's not going to die. None of us are going to die. But Papa died. And then Grandma died. And then Uncle John died. Everybody dies, Mama. Not today. This from Molly, her voice suddenly fierce. Nobody dies today. The angel man won't let them. I told you, little one, I'm not. You saved Mama from the rope. You came when nobody else would help. You're fighting for us when you don't even know us. Molly looked up at him with those 2 old eyes. That's what angels do. I don't care if you believe it or not. You're our angel. Jeb didn't know what to say. He'd spent 6 years believing he was nothing, no one, a dead man walking. And now this child was looking at him like he was something holy. Keep walking, he said gruffly. We're burning daylight. But he squeezed Molly's hand a little tighter, and she squeezed back. They reached the ranch as the last light faded from the sky. It wasn't much a small cabin, a leaning barn, a corral with fences that needed mending. But smoke rose from the chimney. Jeb always left a low fire burning when he'd be gone for the day, and the walls were solid and the roof didn't leak. It's not pretty, Jeb said as he helped Clara down from the horse. But it's warm and it's safe. It's beautiful. Clara was looking at the cabin like it was a palace. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. They got inside, and Jeb's hands moved automatically through the familiar routine, building up the fire, putting water on to boil, pulling out blankets and furs from the chest in the corner. The children clustered around the hearth like moths around a flame, their frozen faces gradually thawing into something like hope. Hannah. Jeb pulled the girl aside while Clara got Billy settled near the fire. I need you to tell me everything. Everything that happened. Everything, you know. Can you do that? Hannah nodded slowly. What do you want to know? Start with the beginning. Who's Marcus Whitfield? And why does Judge Thatcher think your mother killed him? Hannah took a deep breath. Mr. Whitfield owned the biggest ranch in the valley. He was kind to us. After Papa died, we didn't have anywhere to go. Mr. Whitfield let us live in his old bunkhouse, didn't charge rent, said he remembered what it was like to be poor and alone. So your mother had no reason to hurt him? None. Mama did washing and mending for him. He paid fair. He was one of the only people in Willow Creek who treated us like human beings. Hannah's voice cracked. And then 3 days ago, Mama went to his house for her usual work, and when she came home... What? She wasn't right. Hannah's eyes filled with tears. She couldn't remember where she'd been. Her hands were shaking. She kept saying something about tea, about the judge bringing her tea. Then she just collapsed. When she woke up, there were deputies at the door, and they said Mr. Whitfield was dead and Mama had killed him. The judge brought her tea. He'd been doing it for a week, said he was being charitable to a poor widow. Hannah's face twisted with sudden fury. But Mama started getting sick after she drank it, dizzy, forgetting things, seeing things that weren't there. I begged her to stop drinking it, but she said she didn't want to seem ungrateful. Jeb's blood ran cold. Hellebore. It had to be hellebore, the poison that mountain trappers sometimes used on wolves. Small doses caused confusion and tremors. Large doses killed. Someone had been feeding Clara just enough to make her sick, make her unreliable, make her the perfect scapegoat. Hannah. Jeb's voice was low, urgent. Did you see anything else? Anyone else at Whitfield's house that day? The girl hesitated. Her eyes darted to where her mother sat with Billy, then back to Jeb. Elijah did, she whispered. But don't ask him about it. He won't talk about it. He's scared. Scared of what? Hannah's face went pale. Scared they'll kill him too. He saw something through the window. Something he won't even tell Mama. But whatever it was, it's been eating him alive ever since. Across the room, Elijah sat alone in a corner, his face turned toward the wall. His hands were shaking not from cold, Jeb realized, from something else entirely. That boy had seen something that could blow this whole case wide open. But getting it out of him would have to wait. Right now they had more immediate problems. Billy's getting worse, Clara said quietly. She'd moved to stand beside him, and though she swayed on her feet, her voice was steady. His fever's spiking. If it breaks 104... There's willow bark tea in the cupboard. It's not much, but it might help. I know how to make it. I was a healer's daughter back in Missouri. Clara started toward the kitchen area, then stopped. Her hand reached out and touched his arm, just a brief touch, barely there. You're a good man, Jeremiah Hollister. Whatever made you ride into that square this morning, I'm grateful for it. You might not be so grateful when you see what's coming. What do you mean? Jeb looked toward the window, toward the darkness gathering outside. Judge Thatcher isn't going to let this go. I humiliated him in front of the whole town. Took away his scapegoat. He'll send men tonight, maybe tomorrow. But they're coming. Clara's face didn't change. No fear, no panic. Just that steady fire burning in her one good eye. Then we'll be ready for them, she said. Ma'am, I've got 16 bullets and a knife. They'll bring 50 men. And I've got 5 children who need me alive. Clara lifted her chin. I've survived worse odds than this, Mr. Hollister. I've buried a husband. I've starved through winters. I've watched my babies get sick with no money for medicine and no hope for tomorrow. If you think a fat man in a fancy coat scares me, you don't know what real fear looks like. Jeb stared at her. Beaten, poisoned, nearly hanged, and still, she stood there like a queen in a dress of rags. No, ma'am, he said slowly. I don't suppose I do. Clara almost smiled. Then she turned and went to make tea for her dying son, and Jeb watched her go with something stirring in his chest that he hadn't felt in a very long time. Night fell hard and cold. Jeb sat by the window rifle across his knees, watching the darkness. Clara had gotten Billy's fever down slightly with the willow bark tea, and now sat with him in the rocking chair, singing softly in a language Jeb didn't recognize. The other children slept in a pile near the fire, all except Elijah, who sat against the far wall, staring at nothing. "Can't sleep." The boy flinched. "No, sir." "Me neither." Jeb kept his eyes on the window. "Mind if I ask you something?" Silence. "Your sister said you saw something. At Whitfield's house. Something that scared you." More silence. Then barely audible. "I didn't see nothing." "I'm not asking as a lawman's son. I'm asking as a man who wants to help your family. Whatever you saw, it could be the key to proving your mother's innocence." Elijah's breath hitched. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "If I tell, they'll kill me. They'll kill all of us. They're going to try anyway." Jeb finally turned to look at the boy. "The only question is whether we go down fighting or go down hiding. And from what I've seen, you're not the hiding type." Elijah was quiet for a long time. His hands clenched and unclenched in his lap. His jaw worked like he was chewing on words he couldn't quite spit out. "I followed Mama," he finally said, "to Mr. Whitfield's house. I had a bad feeling. She'd been so sick all week, and I didn't want her going alone." His voice broke. "I was hiding in the bushes when it happened." "When what happened?" "Mr. Whitfield and another man were arguing in the front room. The other man was shouting about money, about debts. Mr. Whitfield said he was going to tell everyone the truth about something, about what the other man had done." "What man, Elijah?" The boy looked up, and his eyes were wet with tears he was too proud to shed. "The judge. It was Judge Thatcher. He was there when Mama arrived, and I saw him." Elijah's voice cracked. "I saw him hit Mr. Whitfield with the poker, again and again, until there was blood everywhere. Then he saw Mama standing in the doorway, and he smiled. He smiled like he'd just won a prize." Jeb's blood turned to ice. He dragged her inside and made her touch everything. The poker, Mr. Whitfield's body, got her blood and her fingerprints all over the room. She was so confused from the poison she didn't even know what was happening. Then he put her in a chair and called for his deputies. Elijah was crying, now silent tears streaming down his young face. "He killed Mr. Whitfield to cover up something, and he was going to hang Mama for it. He was going to make us watch our mother die for something he did." Jeb moved to sit beside the boy. He didn't touch him. Elijah wasn't the type to want comfort from a stranger, but he sat close enough that the boy could feel he wasn't alone. "You did good telling me this," Jeb said quietly. "Real good." "It doesn't matter. No one will believe me. I'm just a kid. He's the judge. He's a murderer, and murderers make mistakes." Jeb looked toward the window again. "He dropped something at the scene. I'd bet my life on it. And when I find out what Whitfield knew, what he was going to tell everyone, that's when we'll have him. And if you don't? If he gets away with it?" Jeb thought about it. About his wife and sons in their graves. About the years he'd spent wishing he'd died with them. About the little girl who'd grabbed his coat and asked him to save her mother. "Then I'll die trying to take him down," he said. "But at least I'll die for something that matters. And that's more than I ever thought I'd have again." From across the room, Clara's voice rose soft and clear in her strange, beautiful song. Billy had fallen asleep against her chest, his breathing easier now. Hannah stirred in her sleep and murmured something that sounded like Papa. Grace and Molly clung to each other like they were afraid of being separated even in dreams. A family. Broken and battered and scared, but still a family. Jeb didn't know when he'd started thinking of them that way. He just knew that he'd protect them with everything he had, even if everything he had wasn't enough. "Get some rest," he told Elijah. "Tomorrow's going to be hard." "What are you going to do?" "Watch. Wait." Jeb checked his rifle one more time. "And pray that for once in my miserable life, I'm enough to save the people who need saving." Elijah was quiet for a moment. Then softly, "My pa used to say that God doesn't call the qualified. He qualifies the called." "Your pa sounds like a wise man." He was, until the mind took him. Elijah's voice hardened. I don't pray anymore, Mr. Hollister. But if I did, I'd pray you're the man my mama needs. He got up and went to join his sisters by the fire. Within minutes, his breathing had evened out into sleep. Jeb sat alone in the darkness, watching the snow fall outside, waiting for whatever dawn would bring. Behind him, Clara's song faded into silence. When he looked over, she was watching him with those tired, beautiful eyes. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For giving my children hope. She shifted Billy gently in her arms. For giving me something to fight for, instead of something to die for. You had plenty to fight for before I came along. Did I? Her voice was soft wondering. Most days it felt like I was just surviving, keeping my head down, waiting for the next bad thing to happen. But today, when you shot that rope, I remembered what it felt like to believe things could be different. That maybe the world isn't just cruelty dressed up in Sunday clothes. Jeb didn't know what to say to that, so he said the only true thing he knew. It might still be cruelty, ma'am. I can't promise you a happy ending. I know. Clara's lips curved in something that was almost a smile. But you gave me a chance. That's more than anyone else has done in a very long time. She closed her eyes, and within moments, she too was asleep. Jeb turned back to the window and kept his vigil. Outside, the snow fell harder, and somewhere in the darkness, men with guns were making plans. But here in this small cabin, 6 people were warm and alive and together. For now, that would have to be enough. For now, that was everything. The riders came at midnight. Jeb heard them before he saw them, hoofbeats muffled by snow, but still distinct in the frozen silence. He counted the sounds. 10 horses, maybe 12. More than he'd hoped, fewer than he'd feared. He moved to Clara's side and touched her shoulder. She woke instantly, no confusion, no noise. Just those eyes opening and finding his face in the darkness. They're here, he whispered. Clara didn't panic. She nodded once, then gently shifted Billy into Hannah's arms. The older girl woke at her mother's touch, and understanding passed between them without words. Take your brothers and sisters to the root cellar, Clara whispered. The entrance is behind the woodpile. Don't come out until I call for you. Mama, I can fight. You can protect. That's what I need from you, Hannah. Protect them. Hannah's jaw tightened, but she nodded. Within seconds, she had Elijah awake and moving, gathering the younger ones with quiet efficiency. Grace whimpered when Molly pulled her from sleep, but Molly pressed a hand over her sister's mouth and whispered something that made the little girl go silent. Jeb watched them go, 5 shadows slipping out the back door into the snow. Then he turned to Clara. You should go with them. No. Ma'am. I said no. Clara's voice was steel wrapped in silk. Those men are here because of me. I won't hide while someone else fights my battles. You can barely stand. Then I'll fight sitting down. She moved to the window and picked up the shotgun Jeb had left leaning against the wall. Her hands were still shaking, but her grip was steady. I know how to use this. My father taught me when I was younger than Hannah. Jeb wanted to argue, wanted to tell her that this wasn't her fight, that she'd been through enough, that she needed to think about her children. But when he looked at her face, bruised, battered, illuminated by the dying firelight, he saw something that made the words die in his throat. She needed this. Needed to stand and fight instead of run and hide. Needed to prove to herself that she wasn't just a victim waiting to be saved. Stay low, he said. Don't fire unless you have a clear shot. And if I tell you to run, you run. No arguments. I'll run when my children are safe, not before. There was no time to debate it. Outside, the hoofbeats had stopped. Jeb moved to the front window and peered through the gap in the shutters. Torchlight flickered in the darkness. A dozen men on horseback spread in a loose semicircle around the cabin. At their center sat a figure Jeb recognized even in the dim light, Judge Solomon Thatcher wrapped in a fur coat, his fat face twisted with righteous fury. "Hollister!" Thatcher's voice cut through the night. "Send out the woman and we'll let you live." Jeb checked his rifle. 16 bullets, 12 men. The math wasn't terrible, but it wasn't good either. These weren't trained soldiers, but they were desperate men following a powerful leader. That made them dangerous. "She's not here," Jeb called back. "Sent her on to Silverton with a rider. She's probably halfway to the territorial marshal by now." A murmur ran through the riders. Thatcher's face went purple. "You're lying. Come in and check if you want, but you'll be coming in over my dead body, and I promise I'll take at least 6 of you with me." Silence. Jeb could almost hear them calculating, was the woman worth dying for? Was loyalty to the judge worth a bullet in the chest? "He's bluffing," someone said. "There's only one horse in the corral." Jeb cursed under his breath. He'd forgotten about that. A man alone couldn't have sent anyone anywhere, not without a horse to send them on. "Search the property," Thatcher ordered. "Find her. Find the children." They can't have gotten far. Half the riders dismounted and started spreading out. Torchlight bobbed toward the barn, the woodpile, the root cellar. The root cellar. Jeb's heart stopped. "Clara," he said quietly, "when I start shooting, you go out the back. Get to your children. Get them to the mine on Cathedral Ridge. There's supplies there, food and water. Hide until I come for you. And if you don't come, then you wait for the territorial marshal. He'll be through in 2 weeks." 2 weeks? Clara's voice cracked. "My children can't survive 2 weeks in a mine in winter. They can if they have to, and they will, because you'll make them." Jeb turned to look at her. "You're the strongest woman I've ever met, Clara Brennan. Whatever happens tonight, you keep those children alive. Promise me." Clara's eyes glistened in the firelight. "I promise." "Good." Jeb raised his rifle. "Now go." He fired through the window. The first shot took down the man nearest the root cellar. The second caught a torchbearer in the shoulder, sending his flame spinning into the snow. Chaos erupted, men shouting, horses screaming, gunfire cracking through the frozen air. Jeb kept shooting. 3, 4, 5. A man went down, clutching his leg. Another dropped his torch and ran. The riders were firing back now, but they were shooting wild, panicked, their bullets thudding into the cabin walls without finding their mark. Behind him he heard the back door open and close. Clara was out. Jeb kept firing until his rifle clicked empty. Then he grabbed the shotgun and kicked open the front door. "Come on, you cowards!" he roared into the night. "Come and get me!" A bullet whined past his ear. Another punched through his coat, grazing his ribs. He didn't feel the pain, couldn't feel anything except the cold fury that had been building in him since he'd watched those men put a noose around an innocent woman's neck. He fired both barrels of the shotgun into the darkness. Screams told him he'd hit something. Then he was running, not away from the fight, but into it, his knife in his hand, because if he was going to die tonight, he was going to die taking as many of these bastards with him as he could. A rider came at him with a pistol raised. Jeb ducked under the shot and drove his knife into the man's thigh. The rider screamed and fell from his horse. Jeb grabbed the fallen pistol and fired twice, once into a man running toward the root cellar, once into the darkness, where muzzle flashes told him someone was hiding. "Fall back!" Someone was shouting. "Fall back! He's crazy!" They were running. These men who'd come to murder a woman and her children. They were running from one man with a knife and an empty gun, but not all of them. "Hollister?" Jeb spun. Judge Thatcher sat on his horse at the edge of the firelight, a rifle raised and aimed at Jeb's chest. "You should have stayed out of this," Thatcher said. "You should have ridden on by like everyone else. Couldn't do that." "Why?" "She's nothing. A Mexican widow with too many children. Who cares if she lives or dies?" "I care." Thatcher's finger tightened on the trigger. "Then you can die with her." A shot rang out. But it wasn't Thatcher's rifle. It was a shotgun blast from somewhere behind Jeb, a blast that caught the judge's horse in the hindquarters and sent it rearing with a scream. Thatcher flew from the saddle, his rifle firing wild as he fell, and hit the frozen ground with a sound like a sack of grain. Jeb spun around. Clara stood in the doorway of the cabin, the shotgun smoking in her hands. Her face was white with pain and exhaustion, but her eyes blazed with a fury that made her look like an avenging angel. "I told you to run," Jeb said. "I told you I don't hide while others fight my battles." Thatcher was groaning in the snow, trying to crawl toward his fallen rifle. Jeb walked over and kicked it away, then put his boot on the judge's chest. "It's over, Thatcher. Your men are gone. You're alone." "It's not over." The judge's voice was thick with pain and hatred. "It will never be over. I own this territory. I own the law. I own—" "You don't own anything anymore." Jeb pressed his boot down harder. "Because tomorrow I'm taking you to the territorial marshal, and I'm going to tell him exactly what Elijah saw through that window." Thatcher's face went white. "The boy, he saw everything. He saw you kill Marcus Whitfield. He saw you frame Clara. He saw you smile while you set up an innocent woman to hang for your crime. No one will believe a child. They will when I show them the evidence." Jeb leaned down close. What did Whitfield know Thatcher? What was he going to tell everyone that was worth killing for? The judge's mouth clamped shut. "It doesn't matter." Jeb straightened up. "I'll find out anyway. Men like you always leave a trail. All I have to do is follow it." He pulled Thatcher to his feet and started dragging him toward the cabin. The judge was heavy, his fine coat torn and dirty, his silver hair matted with snow and blood. He looked nothing like the powerful man who'd stood on the scaffold that morning. He looked exactly like what he was, a murderer caught. "Mr. Hollister." Jeb turned. Hannah was running toward him through the snow, her face pale with fear. "It's Billy," she gasped. "His fever. It's worse. He's burning up. He's not waking up." The world tilted. Jeb looked at Thatcher, then at Hannah, then at Clara, who had gone still as stone in the doorway. "Where is he?" "The root cellar. We got out when you started shooting, but he was so hot, and now he's just lying there and he won't open his eyes." Clara was already moving, stumbling through the snow toward the root cellar. Jeb wanted to follow, but he couldn't leave Thatcher unguarded. "Hannah, can you hold a gun?" "Yes, sir." He handed her the pistol he'd taken from the fallen rider. "If he moves, shoot him in the leg. Can you do that?" Hannah looked at the judge with eyes that held no mercy. "I can do better than that." "Leg only. We need him alive." Jeb didn't wait for a response. He ran. The root cellar was small and dark and cold, lit only by a single candle that Elijah held with shaking hands. Molly and Grace huddled in the corner, both of them crying silently. And on the earthen floor, wrapped in a thin blanket, lay Billy. Clara was already there, her hands on her son's face, her voice a desperate whisper. "Billy, Billy, baby, wake up. Please wake up. Please." The toddler didn't move. His face was flushed bright red, his breathing shallow and rapid, his small body burning with a fever that had to be near 105. Jeb had seen this before. With his own sons the night the scarlet fever came. He'd held them just like Clara was holding Billy now, and he'd watched them slip away despite everything he did. "We need to cool him down," he said, his voice rough. "Snow. Pack him in snow. It's the only chance. It'll freeze him. The fever will kill him faster. Trust me, Clara. I've seen this before." Clara's eyes met his. She saw something there, some echo of old grief that told her he wasn't guessing. He knew. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." They worked together, packing snow around Billy's small body while the toddler whimpered and cried weakly. Grace and Molly helped their small hands scooping snow, their faces streaked with tears. Elijah held the candle and watched his brother with an expression that looked like his heart was breaking. "Come on, baby. Clara murmured over and over. Come on, Billy. Fight. You have to fight. The minutes stretched into hours. Billy's fever spiked, then dropped, then spiked again. They changed the snow when it melted again and again until their hands were raw and numb. Clara never stopped talking to her son, never stopped touching his face, never stopped believing that somehow her love would be enough to pull him through. And somewhere in the darkest part of the night, it worked. Billy's fever broke. It happened slowly at first, his breathing evening out, his face losing that terrible flushed color. Then his eyes fluttered open, and he looked up at his mother with confusion and exhaustion, and something that was almost recognition. Mama! Clara's sob echoed through the root cellar. She gathered her son in her arms and held him tight, rocking back and forth, tears streaming down her face. I'm here, baby. Mama's here. You're okay. You're going to be okay. Molly and Grace crowded around, touching their brother's face. His hands, his hair assuring themselves that he was real. He was alive. He wasn't going to leave them like Papa had left them. Elijah stepped back, his face working with emotions he was too proud to show. Jeb put a hand on the boy's shoulder and squeezed. Your brother's tough, Jeb said quietly. Takes after his family. He almost died, but he didn't. That's what matters. Elijah was quiet for a long moment, then so softly Jeb almost missed it. Thank you. For everything. Don't thank me yet. We've still got a long way to go. Dawn was coming. Jeb could see the first gray light seeping through the root cellar entrance. They'd survived the night, all of them, but the danger wasn't over. Thatcher was captured, but his men were still out there. The town was still against them. And they had a sick child who needed real medicine, a poisoned mother, who needed real care, and 20 miles of winter wilderness between them and safety. But they were alive, all of them, and sometimes that was enough. We need to move, Jeb said. As soon as Billy can travel. Clara looked up from her son's face. Her eyes were red from crying, her face exhausted beyond measure, but that fire still burned underneath. Where? Silverton. The territorial marshal is there. Once we get Billy to a doctor and Thatcher in a cell, we can start building a real case. Get witnesses, find evidence, make sure that bastard hangs for what he did. Can we make it 20 miles in winter with the children? Jeb looked at Hannah, who was still holding the pistol, still watching Thatcher with those fierce eyes. At Elijah, who'd seen a murder and kept the secret because he was afraid. At Molly and Grace, who'd been through more in one day than most people faced in a lifetime. At Billy, who'd fought death and won because his mother refused to let him go. Yeah, he said. We can make it. They climbed out of the root cellar as the sun broke over the mountains. The snow had stopped falling and the world looked clean and white and almost peaceful, except for the dark shapes scattered across Jeb's property bodies of the men who'd come to kill them. Horses wandering riderless, the remains of torches still smoldering in the snow. Judge Thatcher sat where Hannah had left him, his hands bound with rope, his face a mask of impotent fury. When he saw them emerge from the cellar, he started struggling against his bonds. You can't do this, I'm a judge, I'll have all of you hanged. Jeb ignored him. He was already thinking about the journey ahead, calculating routes and distances, figuring out how to move 7 people through 20 miles of frozen wilderness when half of them couldn't walk. We'll need the horses, he said, as many as we can catch. Hannah, can you ride? Yes, sir. Good. You'll take Billy on your horse. Clara rides with Grace. Elijah takes Molly. I'll lead Thatcher on foot. On foot? Clara frowned. That'll slow us down. I want him tired and cold and miserable when we reach Silverton. Jeb's voice was hard. I want him to feel just a little bit of what he put you through. Clara looked at the judge. This man who'd poisoned her, framed her, nearly hanged her, while her children watched and slowly nodded. Make him walk barefoot, she said quietly, like he made me stand on that scaffold. Jeb met her eyes. Saw the pain there, the anger, the burning need for some small measure of justice. Barefoot it is. They spent an hour gathering supplies and catching horses. Jeb found 4 that hadn't run off enough for the children and Clara, with Thatcher walking and Jeb leading. He packed food, water, blankets, ammunition. Everything they'd need for a 2-day journey through the mountains. Billy was awake and alert, though still weak. Clara held him close as Hannah lifted them both onto a steady brown mare. "You're going to be okay, baby," Clara whispered to her son. "We're going somewhere safe. Somewhere with doctors and warm beds and people who won't hurt us." "Promise, Mama?" "I promise." Jeb checked the ropes on Thatcher's wrists one more time, then took the lead rope and started walking. The judge stumbled after him, his bare feet leaving bloody prints in the snow. "This is illegal," Thatcher screamed. "This is torture when my men find us." "Your men are dead or running," Jeb said without looking back. "And the only law that matters now is the law I'm taking you to. Keep walking or I'll drag you." They moved out as a group, 7 survivors and 1 prisoner, heading north through the white wilderness. Behind them, Jeb's ranch sat silent and scarred bullet holes in the walls, blood in the snow, the remains of a battle that had nearly cost them everything. Ahead, 20 miles of frozen hell waited. And beyond that, maybe, just maybe, something that looked like justice. Clara rode beside Jeb for most of the first day. Billy slept against her chest, his fever gone, but his strength depleted. She watched the trail ahead with those tired, beautiful eyes, and every so often she'd look over at Jeb with an expression he couldn't quite read. "You should have left us," she said finally. "Back in Willow Creek, you should have ridden on by." "Probably. You'd be warm and safe right now, instead of walking through a blizzard with a prisoner and 5 children. Probably. So why didn't you—" Jeb was quiet for a long moment. The only sounds were the crunch of snow under boots and hooves, the whistle of wind through the pines. Thatcher's labored breathing as he stumbled along behind them. "My daughter used to ask me that," Jeb said finally. "Every time I helped someone, she'd ask me why. I never had a good answer. Just something in me that couldn't walk away from folks in trouble. Used to. She died 6 years ago. Her and her mama both." Clara's face softened. "I'm sorry." "Scarlet fever. Came through Copper Falls like a wildfire. I was away chasing rustlers when it hit. By the time I got home—" He couldn't finish the sentence. After all these years, he still couldn't. "You blame yourself." It wasn't a question. "I should have been there. Should have been home with them instead of out playing hero for strangers." His voice roughened. "That's why I quit. Threw my badge in the dirt and swore I was done caring about anything or anyone." "What changed?" Jeb looked back at the children riding behind them. At Hannah, so fierce and protective. At Elijah, carrying guilt too heavy for his young shoulders. At Molly and Grace, holding hands even on horseback. At Billy, sleeping peacefully for the first time in days. "Your daughter grabbed my coat," he said. "Molly. She looked at me like she believed I could save her mama. Like she trusted me." He swallowed hard. "No one's looked at me like that since Sarah died." "Sarah. My daughter." Clara was quiet for a moment. Then she reached over and touched his arm, just briefly, just enough to let him know she understood. "She'd be proud of you," Clara said softly. "You're Sarah. She'd be proud of the man you still are." Jeb couldn't speak. His throat was too tight, his eyes too wet. He just nodded and kept walking. Behind them the sun climbed higher in the sky. Ahead the mountains waited. And somewhere in the distance, Silverton held the promise of safety, justice, and maybe, just maybe, a new beginning. But they weren't there yet. They still had miles to go, dangers to face, and a long, cold night ahead. Jeb gripped his rifle and kept moving. 1 step at a time, 1 mile at a time, 1 breath at a time. That's how you survived. That's how you saved the people who needed saving. That's how you remembered what it meant to be alive. The first night on the trail, they made camp in a shallow cave that offered some shelter from the wind. Jeb built a small fire and set up a rotation for watch himself first, then Elijah, then Hannah. The children were exhausted, falling asleep almost before they finished eating. Clara stayed awake. She sat across the fire from Jeb Billy, sleeping in her arms, her eyes fixed on the flames. The bruises on her face looked worse in the firelight, mottled purple and yellow against her pale skin. "Can I ask you something?" she said quietly. "Go ahead." "What happens after we get to Silverton, after Thatcher goes to trial? What happens to us?" It was a fair question. Jeb had been wondering the same thing himself. "That's up to you," he said. "The territorial marshal will want your testimony. And Elijah's. After that, you could go anywhere. Start over somewhere new." "With what I've got, nothing. No money, no home, 5 children and a reputation as a murderer." Clara's voice was bitter. "Even if Thatcher hangs, people will always remember that I was the woman on the gallows." "Some will, others won't." Jeb poked at the fire with a stick. "There's good people in this world, Clara. I forgot that for a while, but it's true. People who'll judge you by what you do, not what others say about you." "Have you met many of them?" "1 or 2. He looked up at her across the flames. "I'm looking at one right now." Clara's eyes widened slightly. Something passed between them, an understanding, a connection, a spark of something that might have been more if circumstances were different. "You're a strange man, Jeremiah Hollister," she said softly. "Been called worse." "I didn't mean it as an insult." Clara shifted Billy in her arms, careful not to wake him. "I meant, you're different. From any man I've ever known. You don't want anything from me. You just help, without expecting anything in return. I told you why. Because Molly reminded you of your daughter." "I know." Clara shook her head. "But that was the first moment. You've had 100 chances since then to walk away, to decide we weren't worth the trouble, and you're still here." Jeb didn't have an answer for that. The truth was, he didn't fully understand it himself. All he knew was that somewhere between the gallows and now this woman and her children had become important to him. More important than his own safety. More important than the quiet death he'd been waiting for. "Get some sleep," he said finally. "We've got a long day tomorrow." Clara studied him for a moment longer. Then she did something that surprised them both. She smiled. A real smile, small and tired, but genuine, the first he'd seen from her. "Thank you," she said, "for everything. You can thank me when we're safe." "I'll thank you now, in case we don't make it." She lay down beside the fire, Billy still in her arms, and closed her eyes. "Good night, Jeremiah." "Good night, Clara." He watched her sleep, this woman who'd been through hell and still had fire in her eyes. Watched her children curled together like puppies, drawing warmth and comfort from each other. Watched Thatcher shiver in his corner, bound and gagged, suffering exactly as much as Jeb wanted him to suffer. And for the first time in 6 years, Jeremiah Hollister allowed himself to hope. Maybe they'd make it. Maybe justice would be served. Maybe somehow there was a future waiting for them that looked different from the past. He didn't know. Couldn't know. The only thing he knew for certain was that he'd protect this family with everything he had. Even if everything he had wasn't enough. The fire crackled and popped. Outside, the wind howled. And somewhere in the darkness, danger waited. But tonight in this small cave, 7 souls were warm and alive and together. Tonight, that was enough. Dawn broke gray and bitter, the kind of cold that seeped into bones and stayed there. Jeb woke the children one by one, giving each a moment to shake off sleep before handing them dried meat and a sip of water. They ate in silence, too tired and too scared for conversation. Clara was already awake, changing Billy's wrappings with hands that still trembled from the poison, but moved with a mother's sure gentleness. The toddler was better color in his cheeks, eyes bright with something other than fever, but he was weak, and the journey ahead would test him. "How far today?" Clara asked without looking up. 12 miles if we push. That'll leave us 8 for tomorrow." Can the children make it? Jeb looked at Hannah, who was helping Grace pull on her boots. At Elijah, who was already checking the horses like he'd been doing it his whole life. At Molly, who sat apart from the others, staring at nothing with those two old eyes. "They'll make it," he said. "They're your children." "They don't know how to quit." Clara almost smiled at that. Almost. They broke camp as the first weak sunlight filtered through the clouds. Thatcher had stopped screaming threats sometime during the night, replaced by a sullen silence that Jeb found more unsettling. Men like the judge didn't give up, they schemed. Every step they took toward Silverton was another step closer to justice, and Thatcher knew it. The question was what he planned to do about it. They'd been walking for 2 hours when Molly suddenly spoke. "Mr. Hollister." Jeb slowed his pace to let her horse come alongside him. "What is it, little one? Are you going to marry Mama?" The question hit him like a fist to the gut. Behind him, he heard Clara make a small choking sound. Hannah and Elijah exchanged glances that were equal parts shock and amusement. "Molly," Clara's voice was sharp, "that's not appropriate. Why not? He saved us. He's nice to us. He looks at you the way Papa used to look at you before he got sick." Molly's face was utterly serious. "And we need a Papa. Billy needs a Papa. Grace is always crying for Papa at night when she thinks nobody can hear. Molly, that's enough." "But Mama..." "I said enough." Molly's face crumpled. She turned away, and Jeb saw tears starting to track down her cheeks. The child had only spoken what she was thinking, what she was hoping, and she'd been shut down for it. "Hey." Jeb reached up and touched her arm. "Your mama's right. It's not the time for that conversation, but I want you to know something." Molly looked at him, waiting. "Whatever happens after all this is over, I'm not going anywhere. You understand, I'm going to make sure your mama gets justice and you kids get somewhere safe. That's a promise." "But what about after that?" Jeb glanced at Clara, who was studiously avoiding his eyes. "After that? We'll see. Some things take time to figure out, but I'm not the kind of man who walks away from folks I care about. You care about us. More than I probably should." Molly was quiet for a moment. Then softly, "I'm glad you came to our town, Mr. Hollister. Even if everything else was awful, I'm glad about that part." "Me too, little one. Me too." They rode in silence after that, but something had shifted. The tension that had been building between Jeb and Clara was out in the open, now acknowledged, even if not addressed. Every time their eyes met, there was a question there. A possibility. A maybe. But first, they had to survive. The trail narrowed as they climbed higher into the mountains, switching back and forth along a ridge that dropped away into nothing on one side. Jeb kept Thatcher close, not trusting the man, even with bound hands and bare feet. The judge was watching everything, calculating, waiting for an opportunity. It came just after midday. They'd stopped to rest the horses at a wide spot in the trail, a small clearing where a frozen stream offered water if they broke through the ice. The children dismounted to stretch their legs, and Clara climbed down to help Billy, who needed to relieve himself. Jeb was filling canteens when he heard a cry from Molly, high and terrified. He spun around. Thatcher had somehow slipped his bonds and grabbed the girl, one arm locked around her throat, the other holding a knife he must have stolen when no one was watching. "Nobody move." The judge's voice was ragged, desperate. "Nobody moves, or I'll open her throat." Molly's eyes were huge with terror. Her small hands clawed at Thatcher's arm, but she couldn't break his grip. "Let her go." Jeb's voice was calm, but inside he was screaming. His rifle was 10 feet away, leaning against a rock. He'd never reach it in time. "Drop your weapons, all of them, and give me a horse. You're not getting out of this, Thatcher. Even if you run, they'll find you." "They'll have to find me first. Now drop your weapons." Clara had gone white as snow. Hannah was frozen in place, her hand on her pistol, but unable to draw with Molly in the line of fire. Elijah looked like he wanted to charge. But he knew they all knew that Thatcher would kill Molly before anyone could reach him. Okay. Jeb raised his hands slowly. Okay, you win. I'm putting down my gun. Jeb, no, Clara started. He's got Molly. Jeb's voice was flat. Nothing else matters. He bent down, keeping his movements slow and obvious, and laid his rifle on the ground. His pistol followed, the knife from his belt. Now step back, all of you, away from the horses. They moved back. Thatcher started edging toward the nearest horse, dragging Molly with him. Please. Clara's voice broke. Please, she's just a child. Take me instead. I'm the one you want. You'll have your turn, Mrs. Brennan. Once I'm clear of these mountains, I'll send men back for you. We'll finish what we started in Willow Creek. Thatcher's smile was ugly. Maybe I'll even let the children watch this time. Something snapped in Elijah's face. No. The word was quiet, almost calm. But there was something in the boy's voice that made everyone freeze. No more watching, Elijah said. I watched you kill Mr. Whitfield. I watched you frame my mama. I watched you put a rope around her neck. I'm done watching. Elijah, Clara started. But the boy was already moving. He didn't charge at Thatcher. He was too smart for that. Instead, he grabbed a handful of snow and ice and threw it directly into the judge's face. Thatcher flinched his grip on Molly, loosening for just a second. 1 second was all Molly needed. She bit down on Thatcher's hand hard enough to draw blood. The judge screamed and released her, and Molly dropped to the ground, scrambling away on hands and knees. Jeb was already moving. He crossed the distance in 3 steps and hit Thatcher with everything he had, a right cross that connected with the judge's jaw and sent him sprawling into the snow. The knife went flying. Jeb kicked it away and dropped onto Thatcher's chest, pinning him down. That was a mistake. Jeb said, his voice barely above a whisper. That was a very big mistake. Go to hell, Thatcher spat. You first. Jeb hit him again, and again, and again. All the rage he'd been holding back for Clara, for the children, for his own dead family poured out through his fists. Thatcher's face was a mask of blood by the time Clara's voice cut through the red haze. Jeb, stop. You'll kill him. He froze, fist raised, breathing hard. Thatcher lay beneath him, barely conscious, his fine features ruined. He deserves it, Jeb said. I know. Clara's hand touched his shoulder. But my children are watching, and I don't want them to see this. Jeb looked up. Hannah had Grace pressed against her, hiding the little girl's face. Elijah stood protectively in front of Billy. And Molly, brave, fierce Molly, was staring at him with an expression he couldn't read. He released Thatcher and stood up, his hands shaking with unspent violence. Tie him up, he said, his voice rough. Hands and feet this time, and gag him. I don't want to hear his voice again. Hannah moved to obey, her own hands steady, despite what she'd just witnessed. Elijah helped, pulling the ropes tight, with a satisfaction that spoke of deep, long-held anger. Clara guided Jeb away from the others to the edge of the clearing, where they could speak privately. Are you okay? No. He couldn't lie to her. I wanted to kill him. I still want to kill him. But you didn't. Because of you. Because you stopped me. Clara was quiet for a moment. Then she reached up and touched his face gently, carefully, like she was afraid he might break. You're a good man, Jeremiah Hollister. Don't let him take that away from you. I'm not. You are. Her voice was firm. You saved my children. You saved me. And just now, when every part of you wanted to beat that man to death, you stopped. Because my children were watching. Because it mattered to you what they saw. Her eyes glistened. That's what makes a good man. Not being without darkness, but choosing light anyway. Jeb didn't know what to say. He'd spent 6 years believing he was nothing, no one, a hollow shell walking around in human skin. And here was this woman, beaten, poisoned, nearly hanged, telling him he was good. We should get moving, he said finally. "We've lost time." "We should." But Clara didn't move. She stood there looking at him, and something in her expression shifted. "Jeb." "Yeah. When this is over, when Thatcher is in prison and my children are safe, we need to talk. About what Molly said. About us." "Clara." "Not now. I know. But I want you to know that I've been thinking about it. About what it might look like. A future." She took a breath. "I haven't let myself think about the future in a very long time. It hurt too much. But you make me want to try." Jeb's heart was pounding so hard he was sure she could hear it. "I'm broken, Clara. I've got more ghosts than any woman should have to deal with." "So do I. Maybe that's why we understand each other." She smiled, that small, tired smile that lit up her whole face. Maybe broken people are the only ones who know how to put each other back together. Before he could respond, Hannah's voice cut through the moment. "Mama, the horses are ready." Clara stepped back, her hand falling away from his face. "We should go." "Yeah." Jeb cleared his throat. "We should." They rejoined the group in silence, but something had changed between them. An understanding. A promise without words. The children noticed, of course they did, but none of them said anything. Even Molly just smiled her small, knowing smile and held her mother's hand as they mounted up. The second half of the day was harder than the first. The trail grew steeper, the wind grew colder, and Thatcher, bound and gagged and dragged behind Jeb's horse, slowed them down with his stumbling. Twice they had to stop and wait for him to catch up. Both times Jeb considered leaving him behind. Both times Clara's words echoed in his head. "My children are watching." So he waited, and they moved on. By late afternoon, Grace was crying from exhaustion and cold. Billy had fallen asleep in Clara's arms and wouldn't wake up to eat. Even Hannah, who'd been a rock through everything, was starting to flag. "How much farther?" Elijah asked. His voice was hoarse from the cold. 5 miles, maybe 6. "Can we make it before dark?" Jeb looked at the sky, calculating. The clouds were thickening, promising more snow. The temperature was dropping fast. If they stopped now, they'd survive the night probably. But they'd lose any chance of reaching Silverton tomorrow. "We push on," he said. 2 more hours. Then we find shelter." Nobody argued. They were beyond arguing now, beyond complaining, beyond anything but putting one foot in front of the other. The snow started falling just as the last light faded from the sky. Not a blizzard this time, but a steady, relentless fall that cut visibility and made the trail treacherous. Jeb slowed their pace, picking his way carefully along the narrowing path. That's when he heard it. Hoofbeats. Behind them. Getting closer. "Off the trail," he hissed. "Now! Into the trees!" They moved without question, guiding the horses into the thick pines that lined the ridge. Hannah clamped a hand over Grace's mouth to muffle her whimpering. Clara pressed Billy against her chest, willing him to stay asleep. The hoofbeats grew louder. Jeb counted 3 horses, maybe 4. Moving fast, but careful, the gait of men who were tracking, not just traveling. Through the snow and darkness, he caught a glimpse of them. 4 riders wrapped in heavy coats, rifles in their hands. One of them carried a torch that sputtered and hissed in the falling snow. "Trail ends up ahead," one of them was saying. "If they're heading to Silverton, they've got to come this way. And if they already passed, then we find their tracks and follow. The judge is paying good money for this. Dead or alive," he said. "I thought the judge was the one taken." His brothers put up the bounty. $50 a head for the woman and the ex-sheriff. 20 for each kid. Jeb's blood turned to ice. A bounty. On the children. Beside him, Clara had gone rigid. Her hand found his in the darkness and squeezed, not seeking comfort, but giving it. "We're in this together," that squeeze said. "Whatever happens." The riders passed within 20 feet of their hiding spot. Jeb held his breath, his hand on his pistol ready to fight if they were discovered. One shot would bring them all down on him, but he'd take at least 2 before they got him. Maybe 3 if he was lucky. But the riders didn't stop. They kept moving up the trail, their voices fading into the snow and darkness. Jeb waited until he couldn't hear them anymore. Then he waited 5 more minutes just to be sure. "We can't go that way," he said finally. "They'll be watching the main trail." "Is there another route?" Jeb thought about it. There was an old mining road that cut through the mountains to the east, rougher longer, but it would bring them into Silverton from a different direction. The problem was, he wasn't sure he could find it in the dark. "Maybe. It's risky." "Riskier than running into those men?" "No." He made his decision. "We go east, stay off the main trail. It'll add a day to our journey, but it's better than walking into an ambush." They moved out, heading perpendicular to the trail they'd been following. The going was slow, no path to follow, just snow and trees and darkness. The children were silent, too scared and exhausted to make a sound. Even Thatcher had stopped struggling, conserving his energy for whatever scheme he was planning next. An hour into their detour, Molly's horse stumbled. The animal went down hard, throwing Molly into a snowbank. She screamed a high, terrified sound that echoed through the silent forest. "Molly!" Clara was off her horse in an instant, scrambling through the snow to reach her daughter. "Baby, are you hurt? Are you... my arm?" Molly was crying, clutching her left arm against her chest. "Mama, it hurts." Jeb was there a moment later, his hands gentle as he examined the injury. The arm was bent at an angle that made his stomach turn. Broken. Badly. "I need to set it," he said quietly to Clara. "It's going to hurt." Clara's face was pale, but she nodded. "Do what you have to do." "Hold her still." Clara wrapped her arms around Molly, holding her daughter tight. Hannah knelt beside them, taking her sister's good hand. "Squeeze as hard as you need to," Hannah whispered. "I can take it." Jeb took Molly's broken arm in his hands. The girl looked up at him with those 2 old eyes, tears streaming down her face. "Is it going to hurt bad?" "Yes," he said honestly. "But it'll hurt worse if we don't fix it now. You ready?" Molly nodded, her jaw set with a determination that would have been impressive in an adult. In a 9-year-old, it was heartbreaking. "On 3, Jeb said. 1, 2. He didn't wait for 3. He pulled and twisted in one smooth motion, feeling the bone slide back into place. Molly screamed a raw animal sound of agony that cut through the night. Then she passed out. Clara caught her daughter's limp body, cradling her against her chest. Her face was wet with tears for Molly, for everything, for this endless nightmare that just kept getting worse. "Is she okay?" Grace's small voice came from somewhere behind them. "Is Molly dead? No baby?" Clara's voice was remarkably steady. "She just fainted. She's going to be okay." Jeb was already tearing strips from his shirt, fashioning a splint from straight branches. He bound Molly's arm with quick, efficient movements, the work of a man who'd done this before too many times. "She can't ride," he said. "Not with that arm. She'll have to share a horse with someone." "I'll take her." Elijah's voice was firm. "She doesn't weigh much." They redistributed the load, Molly with Elijah Grace, with Hannah Billy, with Clara. Jeb took Thatcher's lead rope and started walking again. "How much farther to shelter?" Clara asked. "I don't know. I'm looking for an old mining camp. Should be around here somewhere." "And if we don't find it?" Jeb didn't answer. He didn't need to. They both knew what would happen if they spent the night in the open with a broken child and bounty hunters on their trail. They walked for another hour, then 2. Molly woke up partway through, whimpering with pain, but she didn't cry, didn't complain, just held on to Elijah and gritted her teeth against the agony. Jeb was starting to lose hope when Elijah called out, "Mr. Hollister, look." Through the trees, barely visible in the darkness, was the outline of a building. No, several buildings. The abandoned mining camp he'd been searching for. They made their way to the largest structure, a log cabin that had seen better days, but still had 4 walls and a roof. Jeb kicked open the door and ushered everyone inside. It was cold, almost as cold as outside, but it was shelter. It was safety. It was enough. "Build a fire," Jeb said. "Elijah, Hannah, find whatever wood you can. Clara, get Molly settled. I'll stand watch." Nobody argued. They moved with the efficiency of people who had learned to trust each other through shared suffering. Within 20 minutes, a small fire was burning in the old stove, and the cabin was starting to warm. Molly lay on a makeshift bed of blankets, her face pale, but peaceful. The pain had pushed her into a deep sleep, her body's way of protecting itself. Clara sat beside her daughter, stroking her hair with a gentleness that made Jeb's chest ache. "This is my fault," Clara whispered. "All of this. If I hadn't come to Willow Creek, if I hadn't taken that job with Whitfield." "Stop." Jeb knelt beside her. "None of this is your fault. You did what any mother would do. You tried to provide for your children. The only person responsible for this nightmare is the man tied up in the corner. But my children are suffering. Your children are alive. They're together. They have a mother who loves them more than anything in the world." Jeb's voice was fierce. "That's not failure, Clara. That's everything." Clara looked at him, and something in her expression shifted. The walls she'd built around herself, the defenses that had kept her going through poverty and abuse and near death, crumbled just for a moment. "I'm so tired," she whispered. "I'm so tired of being strong." "Then don't be. Not tonight." Jeb reached out and took her hand. "Tonight, let me be strong for both of us." Clara's fingers intertwined with his. Her eyes closed. And slowly, carefully, she leaned against his shoulder. "Thank you," she murmured. "For what?" "For making me believe again." She was asleep before he could respond. Jeb sat there in the firelight, Clara's head on his shoulder, her children sleeping around them. Outside, the snow fell and the wind howled, and bounty hunters searched for them in the darkness. But here in this moment, there was peace. Here there was hope. And for the first time since he'd buried his family, Jeremiah Hollister allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he might find a reason to live again. Clara woke to the sound of gunfire. She jerked upright, heart pounding, reaching for children who weren't beside her. The cabin was gray with pre-dawn light. The fire burned down to embers, and somewhere outside, men were shouting. "Mama!" Hannah's voice cut through the chaos. "They found us!" Clara was on her feet before her mind fully caught up with her body. The children were huddled in the far corner. Hannah, shielding Billy and Grace Elijah, crouched protectively over Molly, who was awake and white-faced with pain. Jeb wasn't in the cabin. Another gunshot cracked through the morning air. Then Jeb's voice, rough and commanding, "Stay back, or the next one goes through your head." Clara grabbed the shotgun from where it leaned against the wall and moved to the window. Through the frost-covered glass, she could see them 6 riders spread in a loose semicircle around the cabin, their horses stamping in the snow. Jeb stood in the doorway, rifle raised, using the frame as cover. One man lay motionless in the snow. Another was clutching his shoulder, cursing. "Give it up, Hollister," one of the riders shouted. "You're outnumbered. Send out the woman and the judge and we'll let you and the kids walk away. You'll have to come through me first. That can be arranged." Clara's hands tightened on the shotgun. She knew what she had to do. "Hannah." Her voice was calm, steady, the voice she used when everything was falling apart, and her children needed her to hold it together. "Take your brothers and sisters out the back. There's a door in the storeroom. Go into the trees and don't stop until you can't hear the shooting anymore." "Mama, no." "Do as I say." Clara turned to look at her eldest daughter. "You're the oldest. They need you. Whatever happens here, you keep them safe. Promise me." Hannah's face crumpled, but only for a moment. Then, that fierce determination, the same determination that had kept this family alive through everything, settled over her features. "I promise." "Take Thatcher too. Don't let him escape, but don't let them get him either. He's our proof." Elijah was already lifting Molly, careful of her broken arm. Grace was crying silently, her small body shaking. Billy clung to Hannah's neck, his face buried against her shoulder. "Go," Clara said. "Now." They went. Clara watched them slip out the back, dragging a bound and gagged Thatcher between them, and felt something inside her crack. This might be the last time she ever saw her children. The last time she ever held them. But if her death bought them time to escape, it was worth it. Every mother knew that calculus. Every mother would make the same choice. She turned back to the window and saw Jeb take a bullet. It caught him in the left arm, spinning him halfway around. He dropped to one knee, his rifle clattering on the wooden floor. The riders surged forward. Clara didn't think. She just acted. She kicked open the cabin door and fired both barrels of the shotgun into the charging men. The blast caught the lead rider full in the chest, throwing him backward off his horse. The others scattered cursing, diving for cover. "Jeb!" Clara dropped the empty shotgun and ran to him. "Jeb, get up." "I'm fine." He wasn't fine. Blood was pouring from his arm, soaking through his coat. But he grabbed his rifle with his good hand and pulled himself upright. "Where are the children?" "Gone. Out the back." "Good. That's good." He fired twice at a man trying to circle around the cabin. "We need to buy them time." "How much time?" "As much as we can." They fell back into the cabin, Jeb covering their retreat with controlled bursts of fire. Clara found his pistol and checked the cylinder, 4 bullets left. She'd have to make them count. "You should have gone with them," Jeb said as they crouched behind the overturned table. "You should have—" "Don't." Clara's voice was fierce. "Don't tell me to leave you. I've lost one husband already. I'm not losing you too." Jeb looked at her, really looked at her, and despite the blood, despite the gunfire, despite everything, he smiled. "That mean you've decided to keep me?" "It means I'm deciding right now." Clara leaned forward and kissed him. Hard and fast and desperate, the kind of kiss that said everything words couldn't express. "So don't you dare die on me, Jeremiah Hollister." "Yes, ma'am." The riders were getting organized now. Clara could hear them shouting to each other, coordinating their attack. There were only 4 left. She'd counted the bodies, but 4 was still too many. 4 could overwhelm 2 wounded, exhausted people with almost no ammunition. "They're going to rush us," Jeb said. "When they do, you run. Go after the children." "Jeb." "That wasn't a request, Clara. Your kids need you, all 5 of them. They've already lost their father. They can't lose their mother too. And what about you? I'll be right behind you." They both knew he was lying. Both knew that he was planning to stay and fight so she could escape. The sacrifice play. The last stand. Clara's heart broke and mended itself in the same instant. "I love you," she said. The words came out before she could stop them. "I know we've only known each other a few days, and I know this is crazy, but I love you. I love who you are, and who you make me want to be. I love that you saved my children when no one else would. I love that you make me believe there's still good in this world." Jeb's eyes were bright with something that might have been tears. "Clara, I'm not leaving you. So whatever plan you've got, whatever noble sacrifice you're planning, you can forget it. We survive together, or we die together. That's the only choice there is." "Ma." For a long moment, he just looked at her. Then he laughed, a real laugh, surprised and warm. "You are the most stubborn woman I've ever met." "You better believe it." "Okay." He checked his rifle one more time. "Okay then, we do this together. But promise me one thing." "What?" "If I tell you to run, you run. Not to leave me to get to the children. To make sure they're safe. Then you come back for me. Can you promise that?" Clara hesitated. It wasn't the promise he'd wanted before, it was a compromise. A chance for both of them to survive. "I promise." "Good." He raised his rifle. because here they come." The door exploded inward. Two men rushed through, firing blindly into the cabin. Clara squeezed off 2 shots. One went wide, one caught a man in the leg. He went down screaming. Jeb shot the other one through the chest, but there were more behind them. Too many. Clara's pistol clicked on an empty chamber. She threw it at the nearest man and grabbed a broken chair leg, ready to fight with her bare hands if she had to. A rifle butt caught her in the stomach. She doubled over, gasping. Someone grabbed her hair and yanked her head back. "Got her!" The man's breath was hot and foul in her face. "Got the woman." "Clara?" Jeb tried to reach her, but 2 men tackled him from behind. His wounded arm gave out and he hit the floor hard. The man holding Clara pressed a knife to her throat. "Stop fighting, or I'll bleed her right here." Jeb went still. His eyes met Clara's across the room, desperate, furious, defeated. "Tie him up," the man with the knife ordered. "Both of them. We're taking them back to Willow Creek." "What about the kids?" "Forget the kids. They're probably dead in the snow by now anyway. The woman and Hollister, that's what matters. That's what the bounty's for." They bound Clara's hands behind her back, rough rope biting into her wrists. She didn't struggle, didn't cry, just watched as they did the same to Jeb as they hauled him upright and shoved him toward the door. "My children," she said. Her voice was calm, but underneath she was screaming. "Please, they're out there alone. The youngest is only 4. Should have thought about that before your man started shooting at us." The leader, a hard-faced man with a scar across his nose, spat on the floor. "Move." They were dragged outside into the cold morning air. Their horses were gone. The children must have taken them, so the bounty hunters doubled up Clara, riding with the leader Jeb with another man. Every step took them farther from the children. Every minute was another minute her babies were alone in the wilderness. Clara prayed. For the first time in years, she actually prayed. Not to some distant God who'd ignored her pleas before, but to whatever force in the universe might be listening. "Keep them safe. Please keep my children safe." They rode for hours. Clara's hands went numb from the cold and the ropes. Her body ached from the fight, from the riding, from everything. But she didn't complain, didn't show weakness. These men were predators, and predators attacked weakness. Jeb rode in silence, his face a mask of controlled fury. The wound in his arm had stopped bleeding, but he was pale, swaying in the saddle. He needed rest, needed medical attention, but neither of them would get anything until they reached Willow Creek. If they reached Willow Creek. Clara was starting to lose hope when she heard it hoofbeats, coming fast, from ahead. The bounty hunters heard it too. They reined in their horses, reaching for weapons. "Who the hell?" A rider burst through the trees. Then another. Then a dozen more. Clara's heart stopped. More bounty hunters. More of Thatcher's men. Then she saw the badges. "Territorial Marshal," the lead rider shouted. "Lower your weapons." Marshal Thomas Brennan, the real Thomas Brennan, not the scared deputy who shared his name, sat his horse like a man who'd been born in the saddle. He was 60 if he was a day, with iron-gray hair and a face that looked like it had been carved from the mountains themselves. Behind him rode 12 deputies, all of them armed, all of them looking ready to fight. "What's the meaning of this?" the bounty hunter leader demanded. "We're conducting lawful business. You're conducting kidnapping and assault from where I sit." Brennan's voice was cold as the wind. "I've got a complaint filed against Judge Solomon Thatcher for murder conspiracy and attempted murder. And I've got witnesses that say you boys are working for him. The judge put up a bounty. The judge is a fugitive. Any bounty he posted is null and void." Brennan nodded to his deputies. "Take them." It was over in seconds. The bounty hunters were outnumbered and outgunned, and they knew it. They surrendered without a fight, throwing down their weapons and putting their hands in the air. Clara slumped in the saddle, relief washing over her so powerfully she almost blacked out. It was over. It was finally over. Then she remembered. "My children." She struggled against her bonds. "Marshall, please. My children are out there. 5 of them. They're alone in the mountains." Brennan was already cutting her ropes. "We found them, ma'am. About 3 miles back. They're safe." They're safe. All 5 of them, plus one very unhappy prisoner." Brennan's weathered face creased in something like a smile. "Your boy Elijah, he's got grit. Held a gun on that judge for 6 hours, wouldn't let anyone near him until we showed our badges." Clara burst into tears. She couldn't help it, couldn't stop it. All the fear, all the pain, all the desperate hope, it all came pouring out in great racking sobs that shook her whole body. Strong arms wrapped around her. Jeb's arms, despite his wound, despite his own exhaustion. He held her while she cried, murmuring words she couldn't hear but understood anyway. "It's okay. We made it. It's over." "Mama?" Clara's head snapped up. Through her tears, she saw them, Hannah and Elijah and Molly and Grace and Billy, all of them running toward her through the snow. She slid off the horse and opened her arms, and they crashed into her like a wave. "Mama, Mama, we were so scared. Are you hurt? Is Mr. Hollister? We kept the bad judge tied up, Mama, just like you said." "I was brave, Mama. I didn't cry, not even once." "Mama, up, Mama, up." Clara held them all. Somehow, impossibly, she held all 5 of her children at once, kissing their faces, touching their hair, assuring herself that they were real, they were alive, they were here. "My babies," she whispered. "My brave, beautiful babies." Jeb stood apart, watching them with an expression that broke Clara's heart. Longing and joy and grief all tangled together, the face of a man who'd lost his own family and was watching this one reunite. "Mr. Hollister." Grace broke away from her mother and ran to Jeb. She threw her arms around his legs and held on tight. "You saved us," she said, her small voice muffled against his coat. "You saved my mama. You're our angel." Jeb looked down at her, and Clara saw something shift in his face. The walls he'd built around himself, the defenses that had kept him isolated for 6 years, crumbled piece by piece. He knelt down and hugged Grace properly. "I'm not an angel, little one. Just a man who got lucky enough to find your family. You can be our family, too." This from Molly, her broken arm cradled against her chest. "If you want. Mama likes you, and we need a papa." "Molly," Clara started. "She's right, Mama." Hannah's voice was quiet but firm. "We all talked about it, while we were waiting. We want him to stay." Clara looked at her children, all 5 of them watching her with hope written plain on their faces. Then she looked at Jeb, who was staring at her like she held the answer to every question he'd ever asked. "Well," she said softly, "I suppose that's a conversation we'll need to have." "Yes, ma'am." Jeb's voice was rough. "I suppose it is." Marshal Brennan cleared his throat. "Hate to interrupt, but we should get moving. There's a doctor in Silverton who needs to look at that arm, and I've got a judge who needs to see the inside of a cell." They rode into Silverton as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. The town was small but prosperous, built on silver mining money and frontier determination. People came out of shops and houses to stare at the strange procession, the marshal's deputies, the bound prisoners, the wounded man, the woman with 5 children, who looked like they'd been through a war. Which in a way they had. The doctor's office was warm and bright, smelling of carbolic acid and clean linen. Clara sat with her children while a young physician examined Molly's arm, pronounced the setting adequate, and wrapped it properly in a real splint. Billy got a full examination too. The fever was truly broken. The doctor said, though, he'd need rest and good food to fully recover. Jeb took longer. The bullet had gone through clean, but the wound was deep, and he'd lost a lot of blood. Clara sat beside him while the doctor worked, holding his good hand, feeling him squeeze every time the needle went through skin. "You're going to have a scar," the doctor said conversationally. "Got plenty of those already. This one will be impressive. Good story to tell your children." Jeb glanced at Clara. She glanced back. Something passed between them that didn't need words. "Yeah," Jeb said softly. "Good story." When the doctor was finished, Marshal Brennan appeared in the doorway. "Mrs. Brennan, Mr. Hollister, I need to speak with both of you, officially." They followed him to his office, leaving the children in the doctor's care. The room was small and cluttered, every surface covered with papers and wanted posters and the accumulated debris of frontier law enforcement. "I've taken Judge Thatcher's statement," Brennan said, settling behind his desk. "And by statement, I mean I've listened to him scream about his innocence for 2 hours, while my deputies rolled their eyes." He pulled out a ledger and a pen. "Now I need yours." They told him everything. Clara started from the beginning, the poisoned tea, the blackouts, waking up covered in blood, with no memory of what had happened. Jeb took over with what he'd found at the crime scene, the belt, the promissory note, the evidence of conspiracy. And then Elijah spoke. Clara hadn't realized her son had followed them. He stood in the doorway, his young face hard with determination. "I saw it," Elijah said. "I saw him kill Mr. Whitfield." He told the whole story, every detail, every moment. How he'd followed his mother to Whitfield's house because he'd had a bad feeling. How he'd watched through the window as Thatcher and Whitfield argued about money and secrets. How he'd seen Thatcher pick up the fireplace poker and swing it again and again, until there was nothing left but blood. By the time he finished, Clara was crying again. Her brave boy. Her 12-year-old son who'd carried this horror inside him, who'd been too scared to speak because he thought they'd kill him too. "You did good, son." Brennan's voice was gentle in a way Clara hadn't expected. "Real good. It takes courage to speak the truth when powerful men want it buried." "Will he hang?" Elijah's voice was flat. "Judge Thatcher, will he hang for what he did? With your testimony and the physical evidence?" "Yes, he'll hang." Elijah nodded slowly. Something in his face eased like a wound that was finally starting to heal. "Good," he said. "That's good." He turned and walked out without another word. Clara watched him go, her heart breaking and mending all at once. Her boy had grown up too fast, had seen things no child should see, but he'd survived. They all had. "The trial will be in 3 weeks," Brennan said. "I'll need all of you to testify. Mrs. Brennan, your children, Mr. Hollister. Can you stay in Silverton until then?" Clara looked at Jeb. They had nothing. No money, no home, no possessions beyond the clothes on their backs. 3 weeks in a strange town with 5 children seemed impossible. "I've got a place," Jeb said slowly. "A ranch 8 miles west of here. It's not much, but there's room. The house burned, but the land's still good." He turned to Clara. "If you'd be willing to stay there, with me, until this is settled." "Mr. Hollister, I can't ask you to." "You're not asking. I'm offering." His voice softened. "We've come this far together, Clara. Let's see it through." She looked into his eyes and saw everything she needed to know. This wasn't charity. It wasn't obligation. It was something else entirely, something that had been building since the moment he'd shot that rope and caught her in his arms. "Okay," she said. "Okay, we'll stay." They left the marshal's office as the stars came out one by one, filling the sky with cold, distant light. The children were waiting outside, huddled together against the evening chill. "Where are we going, Mama?" Grace asked. Clara took her daughter's hand. Then she took Jeb's hand with her other. The children fell in around them, Hannah carrying Billy Elijah, supporting Molly Grace, holding onto Jeb's coat like she'd never let go. "Home," Clara said. "We're going home." And for the first time since her husband had died, since her world had fallen apart, since she'd stood on a scaffold with a rope around her neck, for the first time in longer than she could remember, Clara Brennan believed it. The ranch looked different in springtime. 3 months had passed since that terrible winter, and the world had transformed. Snow had melted into rushing streams. Dead brown grass had given way to green. Wildflowers dotted the meadows in splashes of yellow and purple and blue. And where Jeb's old cabin had burned to ashes, a new house stood bigger, stronger built with the help of neighbors who'd heard the story and wanted to be part of something good. Clara stood on the porch watching her children play in the yard. Billy chased butterflies with the boundless energy of a 4-year-old who'd nearly died and didn't know enough to be grateful. Grace and Molly picked wildflowers, weaving them into crowns that they placed on each other's heads with great ceremony. Hannah sat under a tree, reading a book, a real book, bought from the general store in Silverton, with money they'd actually earned. And Elijah worked beside Jeb in the corral, learning to break horses the way Jeb's father had taught him, the way Jeb had taught his own sons before they died. "Mama!" Clara turned. Hannah had closed her book and was walking toward the porch, her face thoughtful. "What is it, sweetheart?" "The trial starts tomorrow." "I know." "Are you scared?" Clara considered the question. 3 months ago, the thought of facing Judge Thatcher again would have filled her with terror. The man who'd poisoned her, framed her, nearly murdered her in front of her children. The man who'd hunted them across frozen mountains and tried to have them killed. But that was 3 months ago, before she'd learned what she was capable of. Before she'd discovered that survival wasn't just about staying alive, it was about refusing to let evil win. "No," she said. "I'm not scared. I'm ready." Hannah nodded slowly. "Me too." That evening, they gathered around the dinner table, all 7 of them, because somewhere along the way, Jeb had stopped being a stranger and started being family. Clara had cooked a proper meal, the first real cooking she'd done since Thomas died. Roast chicken and potatoes and fresh bread bought with money from Jeb's trap lines and her own sewing work. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. "I want to say something," Jeb announced, setting down his fork. The children went quiet. Even Billy stopped pushing peas around his plate. "These past 3 months," Jeb's voice was rough with emotion. "I spent 6 years thinking my life was over, thinking I'd never have a family again, never have a reason to wake up in the morning." He looked around the table at each face in turn. "You changed that. All of you. You gave me something worth fighting for, worth living for." "We didn't do anything," Molly said. Her arm had healed, though it would always ache in cold weather. "You saved us. No, little one, you saved me." Jeb's eyes met Clara's. "Your mama grabbed my heart the same way you grabbed my coat, and I don't ever want her to let go." Clara's breath caught in her chest. She knew what was coming. Had known it was coming for weeks, ever since the night Jeb had taken her hand in the moonlight and asked if she could ever love a broken man like him. She'd told him the truth, that she already did. Clara May Brennan. Jeb stood up from the table and walked around to where she sat. Then slowly, deliberately, he got down on one knee. "I know this isn't how things are usually done. I know we haven't known each other long, but I've learned that time doesn't matter as much as truth. And the truth is, I love you. I love your children. I love the family we've become." He pulled something from his pocket. A ring, simple gold worn smooth with age. "This was my mother's," he said, "and my grandmother's before her. I've been carrying it for 30 years, waiting for the right woman to give it to." His voice cracked. "Clara, will you marry me?" The children were holding their breath. Grace had her hands pressed over her mouth. Molly was grinning so wide it looked like her face might split. Hannah was crying silently, happy tears streaming down her cheeks. Elijah was trying very hard to look unaffected, but his eyes were suspiciously bright. And Billy, oblivious to the significance of the moment, was sneaking peas onto Grace's plate. "Yes," Clara said. The word came out as barely a whisper, so she said it again louder. "Yes, Jeremiah Hollister. Yes, I'll marry you." The children erupted. Grace and Molly were screaming with joy. Hannah was laughing and crying at the same time. Even Elijah was grinning, his tough boy facade cracked wide open. Billy looked around in confusion, then started screaming too, because that's what everyone else was doing. Jeb slid the ring onto Clara's finger. It fit perfectly, like it had been waiting for her all along. "I love you," he said. "I love you too." Clara pulled him up and kissed him right there in front of all 5 children, and she didn't care one bit about propriety or what anyone might think. This was her family. This was her home. And tomorrow she would face the man who'd tried to destroy both, and she would win. The trial began at 9 o'clock in the morning. The courtroom was packed. People had come from 3 counties to witness the trial of Judge Solomon Thatcher, the man who'd ruled Willow Creek with an iron fist, who'd murdered Marcus Whitfield, who'd framed an innocent widow, and nearly hanged her in front of her children. Clara sat in the front row with her family. Jeb was beside her, his hand warm and steady in hers. The children were lined up beyond him. Hannah, Elijah, Molly Grace, and Billy on Hannah's lap. All of them dressed in their best clothes, all of them ready to face the monster who'd almost destroyed them. Thatcher sat at the defendant's table, looking nothing like the powerful man he'd been. 3 months in a territorial prison had stripped away his expensive clothes, his silver-haired dignity, his air of untouchable authority. He was just a fat old man now, sweating in a cheap suit surrounded by lawyers who knew they couldn't win. The prosecutor was Margaret Chen, the same sharp-eyed woman who'd taken Clara's statement in Silverton. She'd built her career on taking down corrupt officials, and she approached this case with the focus of a hawk stalking prey. The prosecution calls Clara Mae Brennan to the stand. Clara stood. Her legs trembled, but her voice was steady as she took the oath and settled into the witness chair. "Mrs. Brennan." Margaret Chen's voice was calm, professional. "Please tell the court what happened on the morning of December 14th, 1878. Clara told her story. All of it. The poisoned tea, the blackouts, waking up covered in blood with no memory of what had happened, the noose around her neck, her children's screams, the stranger who'd shot the rope and saved her life. She told them about the flight through the mountains, the attack on the cabin, the bounty hunters and the broken arm, and the nights spent huddled in caves, not knowing if they'd survive until morning. And she told them about Jeb, about the man who'd given up everything, his safety, his solitude, his carefully constructed walls to protect a woman and children he didn't even know. When she finished, Margaret Chen nodded slowly. "Thank you, Mrs. Brennan. I have no further questions." Thatcher's lawyer stood for cross-examination. He was a slick man from Denver, hired with the last of Thatcher's hidden money, and he clearly thought he could rattle Clara with aggressive questions. He was wrong. "Mrs. Brennan, isn't it true that you were found standing over Marcus Whitfield's body with blood on your hands?" "I was found, yes." "And isn't it true that you had a financial motive to kill Mr. Whitfield, that he'd threatened to evict you from his property?" "No, Mr. Whitfield was kind to us. He never threatened anything." "But you can't actually remember what happened that day, can you? By your own admission, you have no memory of—" "I remember enough." Clara's voice was steel. "I remember Judge Thatcher bringing me tea every day for a week. I remember feeling sicker and sicker. I remember my hands shaking so badly I couldn't hold a needle. And I remember his face when they put the noose around my neck. He was smiling. He was enjoying it." The lawyer faltered. "Mrs. Brennan." "You want to know what I remember? I remember my children crying. I remember my 14-year-old daughter begging someone, anyone to help us. I remember thinking I was going to die and my babies would have to watch." Clara leaned forward. "Your client did that. He poisoned me, framed me, and tried to murder me. And when that didn't work, he sent men to hunt us down like animals. So don't you dare stand there and pretend there's any doubt about what happened." The courtroom was silent. Even the judge looked moved. "No further questions," the lawyer muttered. Elijah testified next. He was pale and shaking, but he told his story with the same fierce determination that had gotten them all through the mountains. He described what he'd seen through Whitfield's window, the argument, the poker, the blood. He described Thatcher's smile as he framed Clara. He described holding a gun on the judge for 6 hours in the wilderness, refusing to let anyone near him until the marshals arrived. By the time he finished, several members of the jury were openly weeping. Jeb testified about the physical evidence: the belt with Thatcher's initials, the promissory note showing Whitfield's debt, the hellebore found in the tea leaves Clara had saved without knowing why. Marshal Brennan testified about the arrest, the bounty hunters, the confession one of them had made in exchange for a lighter sentence. And finally, Margaret Chen called her last witness. The prosecution calls Dr. Samuel Whitfield to the stand. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Marcus Whitfield's brother, a physician from San Francisco, who'd traveled 1,000 miles when he heard about the trial. Dr. Whitfield. Margaret Chen's voice was gentle. Can you tell the court about your relationship with your brother? Marcus and I were close. We wrote to each other every month. He told me everything. Samuel Whitfield's voice was steady, but his hands trembled, including what he'd discovered about Judge Thatcher. And what was that? Thatcher had been embezzling from the town treasury for years, thousands of dollars. Marcus found the proof. He told Thatcher he was going to expose him. Samuel's voice hardened. And then Marcus turned up dead, and an innocent woman was blamed for it. Do you believe Judge Thatcher murdered your brother? I know he did. Marcus wrote to me the week before he died. He said he was afraid. He said Thatcher had threatened him. Samuel looked directly at the defendant's table. My brother was a good man. He helped people. He didn't deserve what happened to him. And neither did Mrs. Brennan. The defense tried to object, tried to claim the letters were hearsay, but the damage was done. The jury had seen the truth. They'd heard it from a dead man's brother. The verdict came back in less than an hour. Guilty on all counts. All. Thatcher screamed when they read the sentence, screamed about injustice and conspiracy and how they'd all regret this. The deputies had to drag him out of the courtroom still screaming, while the gallery erupted in cheers. Clara sat very still, feeling the weight of the moment settle over her. It was over. Finally, truly over. Jeb's arm came around her shoulders. You okay? I don't know. She looked up at him with tears in her eyes. I don't know what okay feels like anymore. Then we'll figure it out together. The children crowded around them, hugging and crying and talking over each other in their excitement. Even Elijah let himself be pulled into the embrace, his tough exterior finally cracking into something softer. They walked out of the courthouse into the spring sunshine, and Clara lifted her face to the warmth. She was free. Her children were safe. And the man who'd tried to destroy them would hang for his crimes. It was more than she'd ever dared to hope for. The wedding was held in June on the same hillside where wildflowers bloomed in carpets of gold. Clara wore a dress she'd made herself, simple white cotton with lace at the collar, the finest work her hands had ever produced. Jeb wore his Sunday best, which was really just his regular clothes cleaned up and pressed, but Clara thought he'd never looked more handsome. The children stood with them as witnesses. Hannah held the rings. Elijah stood straight and proud beside Jeb, serving as best man. Molly and Grace scattered flower petals down the makeshift aisle. And Billy, now 5 years old and full of opinions, provided commentary throughout the ceremony. When does the kissing part happen? Billy, hush. But I want to see the kissing part. Marshal Brennan performed the ceremony apparently territorial. Marshals could do that with a gruffness that couldn't quite hide his pleasure at being asked. Do you, Jeremiah Hollister, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. And do you, Clara May Brennan, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? Clara looked at Jeb. At this man who'd appeared out of nowhere on the worst day of her life and refused to let her die. Who'd fought for her, killed for her, almost died for her. Who'd loved her children like his own and given her a reason to believe in the future again. I do. Then by the power vested in me by the Wyoming Territory, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Brennan's weathered face cracked into a smile. You may kiss your bride. Finally, Billy shouted, and everyone laughed. Jeb pulled Clara close and kissed her soft and sweet and full of promise. The children cheered. The handful of neighbors who'd come to witness applauded. And somewhere high above, Clara could have sworn she heard her first husband's voice whispering that it was okay, that she was allowed to be happy again. That loving someone new didn't mean forgetting someone old. They held the reception in their new house, the house that had risen from the ashes of the old one, built with the help of good people who wanted to be part of something beautiful. There was food and music and dancing that lasted until the stars came out. As the evening wound down, Clara found herself standing on the porch, looking out at the land that was now theirs. Jeb came up beside her and slipped his arm around her waist. "Penny, for your thoughts." "I was thinking about how different everything is. 6 months ago, I was standing on a scaffold with a noose around my neck. I thought I was going to die. I thought my children would have to watch their mother hang." She leaned into him. "And now look at us. It's a good view. It's the best view I've ever seen." They stood in comfortable silence, watching their children, all 5 of them theirs, now in every way that mattered, playing tag in the fading light. Hannah was letting the younger ones catch her. Elijah was pretending to be too cool to participate, but Clara caught him grinning when Molly tackled him. Grace and Billy shrieked with laughter as they ran. "Mr. Hollister!" Hannah appeared at the foot of the porch steps, slightly out of breath. "I mean, Pa." Jeb's face softened at the word. It was the first time any of them had called him that. "What is it, sweetheart?" "Elijah wants to know if you'll teach him to shoot tomorrow. He says he's old enough and—" She hesitated. "He wants to be able to protect us, in case anything ever happens again." Jeb glanced at Clara, who nodded slightly. "Tell him yes," Jeb said. "First thing in the morning. We'll make a marksman out of him." Hannah beamed and ran off to deliver the message. Clara watched her go, her heart full to bursting. "You're good with them," she said. "Better than I expected. Better than I had any right to hope for." "They're easy to love." Jeb pulled her closer, like their mother. Flatterer. Truth-teller. Clara turned in his arms, facing him fully. The man she'd married. The man who'd saved her life and given her a future. The man who'd taken 5 broken children and shown them what a father's love looked like. "Thank you," she said, "for everything. For the scaffold. For the mountains. For not giving up on us even when it would have been easier." Giving up was never an option. Jeb touched her face gently. "From the moment Molly grabbed my coat and asked me to save her mama, I was yours. I just didn't know it yet. And now I know." He kissed her forehead. "Now I know that everything I lost led me to everything I was meant to find. You, the children, a reason to keep breathing." His voice dropped to a whisper. "You're my second chance, Clara. My miracle. And I'm going to spend every day of the rest of my life earning it." Clara's eyes filled with tears. Happy tears. The kind she'd forgotten existed. "You already have," she said. "You earned it the moment you raised that rifle and shot the rope. Everything since then has just been proof." They stood together as the sun set and the stars came out and their children's laughter filled the air. 2 broken people who'd found each other in the darkest moment of their lives. 2 families who'd become one through blood and fire and stubborn, impossible hope. Behind them the house glowed with lamplight and warmth. Ahead of them stretched years of possibilities, hard work and joy, and the ordinary magic of building a life together. And Clara knew with a certainty that went deeper than thought that she was finally truly home. Not because of the house or the land or the ring on her finger, but because she'd found people worth fighting for, people worth dying for, people who would fight and die for her in return. That was what made a home. Not walls and roofs and property lines. Love made a home, and they had more of that than they'd ever need. The children came running up to the porch demanding food and attention and stories before bed. Jeb lifted Billy onto his shoulders. Clara took Grace's hand. Hannah and Elijah and Molly fell into step beside them. 7 people, 1 family, walking together into the rest of their lives, and somewhere high above, in a heaven that might or might not exist, Clara liked to think that Thomas Brennan and Martha Hollister were watching, smiling, knowing that the people they'd loved had found their way through the darkness and into the light. The door closed behind them. The lamplight spilled warm and golden into the night, and outside, the Wyoming wind carried the sound of laughter across the mountains, the laughter of a family that had been forged in fire and tempered by love, a family that would never be broken again.